Good afternoon, students. This is your professor. I'm going to cover historical context, developing a deeper awareness of the past. Some students do struggle with this, and it is an area which they just need some help with, and it's okay. So let's go over context. This is one of the 5 C's of our history, and I decided to go with a who, what, when, where, why type aspect to it. So in this order, we just kind of lose when. Historical context is the awareness that the people who created sources were living at a time which may have held opinions and beliefs that are very different to what we consider normal. So the when factor, today it's 2020. If we're reading a source from, say, the United States Constitution time period, 1787, those people did things differently. They had their reasons for doing what they did, not your reasons. Who? Identifying historical context allows us to demonstrate historical empathy, to understand the different attitudes from the past without judging them. This is presentism, obviously, where we project our own values back onto the people of the past without realizing that they did not experience our values because they were different than ours. So this is the part we need to understand the past. We don't have to agree with it, but we need to understand it to accept the fact that these people were different in the past. And they had the reasons for being different. We want to understand what those reasons were. And this also kind of gets into the lenses of history and perspectives. They saw things differently than we did. Why? Our where category. Without historical context, we're only seeing a piece of the scene and not fully understanding the influence of the time and place in which the situation occurred. So when we look at where is this taking place in the time period? This is why the importance of historical context. If you don't have the historical context, you're disjointed from where you should be in the past. But historical context is also being aware of the important events of the time that influence the creation of the source. What's taking place that's driving the events that we're studying? The people in the past acted for their reasons. What drove them to that? In analyzing, get to the why, in analyzing historical events, context can help us understand what motivated people to behave as they did. Again, back in the case of the United States Constitution drafting, there were problems with the Articles of Confederation, and the people were in a massive depression. Now, money was not there. The United States was really in bad shape. You know, you talk about, you're used to this United States superpower. The United States in 1787 was nowhere near being a superpower. They were a fourth-rate nation. When the people of Europe laughed at them, there's a strong danger of the United States ceasing to exist and each of those individual 13 states breaking off and going their own way. Not only that, the lands that they had won in the revolution to the west, all the way to the Mississippi River, Spain was offering stuff to those people and maybe going to break away some of those states to attach it to them. So there's things that were occurring and it helped drive those people to what they were doing with the Constitution. There's reasons why they did what they did. That's historical context. Let's move on. 5 more W's. Look at sources. So when we look at our sources of the past, let's apply the 5 W's to those sources. We should. When was the source written or made? Who wrote or made it? Where was it written or made? What kind of source is it? How was it written or made? Finally, why was the source written or made? So when we start applying these, you can go right back to the previous slide and use the contextual bits with it, and you will come up with stuff for your source. This is a source evaluation and a way of looking at the source and getting the context behind it. Nothing happens in a vacuum. There's always causation and the effect. Look at it in historical context. All right, now I've got 2 examples that I want to go over context with you. Example 1, I do this with my live students. I ask them, I write this on the board. My daughter will be heading to California shortly after she marries. And then I go to pairs or triplets, depends on how many students I have in the class, and I give them a date. Each group has a different date. Usually I do it based on decades or depending on the number of students, quarter centuries. And I go all the way back to 1849 with the minor 49er situation, the California Gold Rush. And so then I start with the Gold Rush, the oldest time period. In times I've had so many students, I actually went back before it was American territory and did it within the Spanish and Mexican context of it, which really changed things. So think about it. Today, it's 2020. My daughter will be heading to California shortly after she marries. Okay. Well, the first question is, when will I see her again? Well, it's 2020. I'll see her. I can FaceTime her. I can video chat with her on Zoom. I mean, I can use my Discord. I can use all kinds of video ways to do it. I can do it while she's on her way there. I can fly to see her, drive to see her. She can fly to see me, take a train, all kinds of ways. It'll take me a couple of days to get there, driving or flying or whatever. I mean, whatever. I can see her, or she'll come home and visit for Christmas. But now let's start putting that into context. It kind of also goes along with how will she get there. Let's start going back in the past. Let's go back to, say, 1950. When will I see her again? Okay, you didn't just pick up and fly that often in 1950. You drove. And you took some time to get there. So you would do this maybe once a year tops, maybe every 2 or 3 years. So your distance of seeing, the intermissions in between of seeing somebody starts to increase. How will she get there? Well, they're going to drive, they could fly, they could take the train. Back in the 1950s, that would have been more common, taking a train. All right, let's go back to 1925. All right, so now when do I see her again? Okay, well, driving, the cars and the roads were practically non-existent to go across the country. So cars, that's questionable. Planes, no, there was 1925, there's next to no, if any, passenger service. You had to have some money. So I'd be taking a train. Well, the trains existed, but it was more a longer journey to get back and forth. So this is in our case, it'd be 2, 3 years between seeing. All right, let's go back to 1900. All right, well, obviously not going to fly because the White brothers haven't done the flying experiment yet, so that's out. Cars, there aren't any roads unless you wish to walk or follow those, and what few cars there weren't enough to do anything with. So you're going to take a train, or you can walk. I mean, we always have that option. Good luck with that. So you start to see differences here. And of course, the train traveling is a lot more difficult this time. Let's go back to 1875. We're at the train station now. Or people were still taking wagons across the prairies and mountains to get around still. Go back to 1849. There is no train. There's no train service. How will you go to California? She's going with her husband to California through the gold rush. You may never see her again. And if she gets there, she's walking or riding a horse. So think about these things. The context changes. And when I did the earlier ones, let's say you were going to go there in 1800 when it was part of, from the part of the Spanish Empire. You're taking a ship because nobody was walking across the country in 1800. It wasn't even a country at the time. Anything west of the Mississippi River was French or Spanish territory, or was not even owned by them. The Native Americans claimed all of it and did even during that time period anyway. So our context changes based on when. So when will I see her again? Maybe never, depending on the context, the time period. How will she get there? That's going to depend. So our 5 W's of historical context, when we start applying this, questions have different answers. All right, now let's go to our next one. All right, I know the protests are occurring in the United States right now as I'm doing this, and this has nothing to do with that whatsoever. Don't read anything into that, all right? This just happens to be an example that I gave somebody earlier in the forums. And I really wanted to use this because this photograph is different. All right. Now, it's 2020. You're looking at a photograph of, from 1968. So we know it's a Saigon execution. Without looking up anything, I want you to think what you see. Based on what you think you see and what you think you know, just jot down your answers real quick. And let's see how they match up with the 5 W's of historical context. Why don't you pause this while you write down your answers and then start it back up and we'll go to the next slide. So you pause, we'll advance to the next slide, and you come back, we'll be ready to go on from there. Well, let's apply the 5 W's and compare what I've got on here compared to what you came up with based on what you thought you saw in the photograph. When was this photograph taken? February 1st, 1968, the Tet Offensive during the Vietnamese War. Who? General Nguyen, and I'm sorry if I butchered the Vietnamese names, I do not know how to pronounce them well. General Nguyen Ngue Lon on the left, he's the shooter, and Nguyen Van Lim on the right, he is the executed. Where? Saigon, South Vietnam. It was the capital city of that former nation. What is taking place? It is the execution of a Viet Cong commando caught red-handed after his death squad killed 34 people, including several police officers' family members, all bound at the wrist and shot in the head. Why? Photographer Eddie Adams caught the exact moment of the execution. He thought he was just capturing a picture of an interrogation. There are other photographs that go with the series. Adams just caught the exact moment. He did not know that the general was going to shoot the prisoner. He thought he was just going to capture a picture of interrogation. In standard procedure, you put a gun to the guy's head. That was how they did things. Instead, Lone pulled the trigger. And the picture captures the bullet as just after it's in Lim's head. Now the picture, let's go back to the picture real quick. This picture is during the Vietnam War. And for years, and even to this day, it's been 52 years now, this photograph represents the brutality of war to many people and the craziness of this particular war. The context that many people thought they saw, and maybe you did as well, was police brutality and execution of a bound prisoner. But when you start understanding the context, things start changing. And you start to realize that there's a war going on, a nasty guerrilla war. And this guy here that was being executed had just killed 34 people with his death squad. Let's go examine a few more of the contextual factors. The photograph will win the 1969 Pulitzer Prize. For most people, it epitomizes the brutality of the Vietnam War. Under the Geneva Convention, the captured commando was subject to a summary execution. If you're captured, if you're a soldier, and you are out of uniform, doing your job, undercover, then you can be hung. And our nation's history has examples of that. Nathan Hale is a good example of that. Some of the people the commando squad had murdered, remember 34 of them, bound at the hand, shot in the head, were friends of the general. And some of those people killed, I said family members, we're talking children. The Tet Offensive was a rude shock to the people of the United States who had been told that there was a light at the end of a tunnel and that the war was drawing to a satisfactory conclusion. It was a very rude shock to the American people. They were being told the war was coming to an end, the United States was winning, and that the troops would be coming home. That offensive shattered that illusion. President Lyndon Johnson decided not to run for re-election because of the negative morale impact from the Tet Offensive. Johnson felt guilty for the thousands, at that time, 30,000 American troops that had died in the Vietnam War, and would take the actions that he just didn't care about his health and would die a few years later. As a result of Johnson not running, we see another man run, I forget his name right off the top of my head. He runs and barely loses to the guy who did win, Richard Nixon. And there's a lot of things that happened that Richard Nixon did to win that election. And we all know that Richard Nixon will be the only president to resign from office so far because of the things that happened with Watergate when he lied to the American people and cheated to win an election. It wasn't the first time he cheated to win an election, by the way. Finally, the United States would withdraw from the Vietnam War in 1973. South Vietnam would fall to North Vietnam on April 30th, 1975. This photograph was seen throughout the United States, and without the contextual implications behind the photograph, many Americans turned against the Vietnamese War. I'm not here to justify the Vietnam War in any way, shape, or form. I'm just showing you the power of context. Think about it. Think how shocking that photograph is. Think how information is perceived by people, and then what they do with it, what they know about things. And the less they know, the more offbeat, or shall we say erroneous, their contextual conclusions will be from what they see in a photograph. But if you apply the proper context to it, it's an entirely different story. That photograph epitomizes that quite well. Okay, so that's a little bit of lesson on historical context. What's taking place around the topic you're looking at? What's driving it? What's causing these people to do the things that they're doing? They're not doing it into a vacuum. They have reasons for it. Oh, and people want to, like, especially the Constitution, altruistic movement or ideas and concepts. Yeah, it's great if we look back with that lens. But the problem is, when we look at the context, that lens fails to hold. And at the three subjects that we're really studying the most, apartheid, Chairman Mao, and the Constitution, we see the context matters a lot. We have our preconceptions as we look back to the past and our experiences. There's a lot of presentism I see with these subjects. We need to make sure we look at it with with an objective lens, not a subjective lens. All right, and understanding the context behind something will help you with that, and it also helps you prevent presentism and bias. Finally, here we have our references. I put them together. There you go. So if you have any questions, you want to learn more, I made sure all of them had websites, so I made sure I put them all in here. There's all kinds more information you can learn about the photographs and the concepts. And two of them, especially the Grace Fleming and Michael James, those are great websites for learning about historical context and all other things about history. I use them constantly in my teaching. Okay, that's everything. Thank you, guys. Have a good day. Remember, if you have any questions, get a hold of me and we'll work on it.